last week I got to talk about, I did a message called Never Stop Calling. And it was a fun message for me, kind of till the end. But it was a really fun message because it just showed a lot. We looked at the story of the blind beggar, and we looked at the purpose of being persistent and calling out to Jesus. The reason why we should be persistent. The things that come along with it. There were 3 takeaway points. The first one was persistence always gets Jesus' attention. If you notice, every time somebody's persistent about going after Jesus, he always notices them from the crowd. If you remember, they were at the edge of Jericho, and there was a blind beggar, and he was shouting. He heard all the noise. He said, "What's going on?" The guy said, "Well, Jesus is in town." So he shouted to Jesus, and everybody around him was like, "Dude, stop. You're weird. It's embarrassing us. You need to be quiet." And instead of listening to what everybody says, he shouted louder, and Jesus heard him. Then you look at the next story, it's Zacchaeus and the sycamore tree. And Zacchaeus is the only one that goes above and beyond to see Jesus, and Jesus sees Zacchaeus out of the crowd. Persistence always gets Jesus' attention. The second point was he brings you into his presence and speaks over you. And we said there was nothing, you can't walk into the presence of Jesus and come out the same. It just can't happen. This guy walked in as a blind beggar and came out as a sight-filled worshiper. And it all became because he came into the presence of Jesus, and Jesus spoke over him. He said, "Your faith has made you well." Well, it wasn't until Jesus spoke those words that he was immediately healed. It didn't happen in the middle of it. It happened after. Immediately after Jesus said, "Your faith has made you well," you are healed. And we talked about how when we're persistent, Jesus brings us into this place and he speaks words of life over you. And how many of our circumstances would change if we just listened to the words that Jesus said rather than the words of people. And the last point was your calling out impacts everybody. Your calling out impacts everybody. If you remember at the end of the story, not only did the guy that was healed follow God, but everybody else that witnessed it followed Jesus. And what I love about this is I didn't get to share this last week, but 2 weekends ago, me and Alexis, we went and saw the Avengers. I'm a superhero nerd. I love that kind of thing. If there's action-packed stuff going on, I want to see it. I don't care if it's a cartoon. I'm in. So we go to this movie, and I talk her into, "Hey, babe, let's go see IMAX. Let's go see IMAX." She's like, "Don't you know how much those ticket prices are?" and what I realized is the crowd, there was 2 opportunities. You can pay normal tickets and just get a good viewing of the movie, or you can pay extra and get an experience of the movie. And the blind beggar was the guy that yelled for an experience while the crowd followed just to see a viewing. And because he wanted an experience, everybody else called out to Jesus. Everybody else called out because one man desired an experience with Jesus rather than just to follow him around and see what was going on. So this week, I decided that we'd kind of continue that, and I think it's perfect going into radical obedience with a message called "Don't Stop Moving." Don't stop moving. And it's based off this passage right here. If you've got a Bible, we're going to be primarily in Joshua chapter 6, but I want to read you this verse out of Hebrews. It says, "You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised." You need to persevere. So when you do the will of God, you'll receive what is promised. The whole purpose of this is recognizing the promises that God has given us that we haven't received yet. Looking at this, how do we receive those promises that God has given us that we don't have in our hand yet? And one of the things that we need to recognize is he says you need to persevere. It's a necessity. It's not a suggestion. You need to persevere. Obtaining promises requires perseverance. It means continually pushing. But what I love is he says when you accomplish the will of God, and my whole life I grew up asking myself, what is the will of God for my life? And to me, that was a very selfish perspective of what God wanted me to do. What is the will of God for my life? What is the will of God for my life? And this is the point that I've came to, is that the will of God is moving every day. He's put greatness inside of me, and the greatness that he's placed inside of me is wrapped in his will. The will of God is for the kingdom to come down on earth. And he's put a greatness inside of you wrapped in his will. So when you walk in that, you'll release his will on earth. It's not a will for your life, it's a will through your life, if you think about it that way. But it says you need to persevere. You need to persevere. So what I've done is I want to look at a story real quick. We're going to look at the Battle of Jericho, and I'm going to show you 3 reasons why I think people don't persevere, why we quit and why we give up. Again, we're going to be in Joshua chapter 6. The first reason that I've noticed, the reason why we give up sometimes is our perspective gets blocked. Our perspective gets blocked. What we see doesn't match up with what we hear. Joshua 6, verses 1 through 5 says, "Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out, no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, 'See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram horns in front of the ark. And on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast of trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the walls of the city will collapse and the army will go up, everyone straight in.'" See, what I loved is we have Jesus speaking a promise on top of a promise, or God speaking a promise on top of a promise. I want to give you a little bit of background info. Ever since Abraham, God has given a promise of a promised land, right? He gave them a promise of a promised land. "I have a land for you, full of milk and honey." It's just flowing. So then they wandered in the desert for 40 years, and they finally get to the place where they're at the verge of the promised land. They could put their hands on the walls, but the thing about Jericho was it was surrounded by walls. So they couldn't see their promised land. They didn't know what their promised land looked like. They just knew where it was. They knew where it was. So what they're doing is they're holding on to a promise. Joshua has this consultation with God, and he says, "Listen, all right, I know I've got a promise for you. It's right here. It's in this place, but I need you to do this. You got to do this. This is my promise for you, and this is what's going to happen, and you'll obtain the promise." Here's the thing about Jericho, though. It's not that the city was ginormous. I recently learned that you could walk around Jericho in about an hour. So it's not that Jericho was huge. It's just that its walls were so tall. Its walls were so tall, and it caused me to ask the question, how many times do we count ourselves out because we can't physically see our promise? Our perspective is blocked by our circumstances, or the people around us, or our efforts, or whatever it may be, our achievements, or school, or whatever the things that we get out of whack. How many times do we quit pursuing our promise because we can't physically see it? Because our perspective has changed. And then I want to ask, did you guys hear what happened in verse 2? I'm going to read verse 1 and 2. It's kind of crazy because if you're Joshua, you're like, "God, that don't make sense." He says, "Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in." Jericho knew about Israel. They knew the things that God had did. So they were like, "Okay, these people are at our door. We're shutting everything down." But look what God says to Joshua. "See, look, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men." If I'm Joshua, I'm like, "Nope. You just told me that the walls are standing tall, nobody's allowed in, nobody's allowed out. What's going on?" And what happened is I learned that only God can talk in past tense about the battles you haven't faced yet. God can talk in past tense about the battles you haven't faced yet. The Bible says that God goes and he prepares a way for you. We sing that song in worship, "Where there is no way, you make a way." We sing that. My question is, do we believe that? If I can't see my promise, do I believe that God has paved a way for me to go and get it? And if I do believe it, am I going to push long enough to go receive it? Am I going to persevere? Am I going to keep going? God, I love that. God speaks in past tense about things you haven't even faced yet. Whew, that's big. Second thing, another reason why we don't persevere is we don't see our own progress. We often don't see our own progress. One thing, you guys know me, I love working out. I could spend 4 hours in the gym every day if I didn't get in trouble for it. Okay? I would do it. And what I used to work at a gym, and I loved watching new people come in at the beginning of the year, because the number one most common New Year's Eve resolution is I'm going to lose blah, blah, blah weight. I'm going to lose so many pounds. And what happens is a lot of people will go 1 to 2 months and then they'll give up. And the reason that they give up is they don't see it in themselves. They don't see their progress. They don't see the change in their body. They don't see what's going on. And what I've learned, and this is kind of a scientific thing, is when you start working out, did you know you're not the first person to see your results? Holy cow. You're not that guy. It takes 3 months for people to notice the difference in you. It takes 4 before you see it in yourself. So a lot of the goals that people are trying to obtain are because and that they stop, are because they don't see their own progress. Can you imagine if it was instant? We love instant gratification here in the United States. If we can have it now, we want it. If we don't, we give up on it. It's not worth the effort. Can you imagine what it would be like if you ate a broccoli and got an ab? I would be eating right now. I'm not even joking. I would have a 36 pack like all over the place. I'm just saying, but sometimes we live our faith like that. I pray this, so I better get it now. I pray this, so I better get it now. But then we give up when we don't see the spiritual ab, if you know what I mean. It's kind of crazy. I want you guys to see this. Look at this. So with that being said, look at the story that happens in Joshua. Verse 6 says, so Joshua, son of Nun, called the priests, and he said to them, take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord and have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it. And he ordered the army, advance, march around the city with an armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord. When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carried the 7 trumpets before the Lord. They went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time the trumpets were sounding. But Joshua commanded the army, this is a huge verse, hold on to this. Do not give a war cry, do not raise your voices, do not say a word until I tell you to shout, then shout. So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. Then the army returned to camp and spent the night there. I'm going to skip to verse 14. It says, so on the second day, they marched around the city and returned to the camp. Now this is super interesting to me because if I was God, I would have made like the wall fall down in increments. Like if they, day 1, they walk around and the top part of the wall falls just so that they can see what's going on. Day 2 comes around, another part of the wall falls just so that they can see that, hey, you're making progress. You're doing this. You're going great. But what I've learned is sometimes God hides your progress so that you'll rely more on his promise than you will your efforts. Sometimes God is hiding it so you'll trust in the words that he's giving you rather than trusting in what you do. Because a lot of times we'll have a God experience and then we'll face another hardship and think we did it on our own, and then we'll start leaning on our own efforts. Here's the thing about working in your own efforts, it doesn't require any faith. You're not relying on anything. But when you trust in God's promise, you're relying on him. You're relying on him. And what I love is, can you imagine being a soldier like during that whole time? So you wake up that morning, you get loose, you're all stretched. Before I go to work out, I drink what's called a pre-workout. I don't think they had that, so they probably drank ox milk to get all pumped up. So they drink ox milk, they get up, they get together, they're all jumping around with their buddies, chest bumping if they did that back in the day, I don't know. And they get there and Joshua walks up in front of everybody, he says, hey, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna go for a walk around the city. Need you guys to get in a straight line, be quiet. They started kindergarten walking lines. Like, I'm not even joking. Think about that. That started with Joshua. He's a great guy. And then, okay, so you go do the walk. You're like, you do the walk and you come home. Your wife's cleaning at the house, and they didn't have house, but I'm going to use it for the illustration. And you walk in the door and she's like, hey, babe, how was it today? Is it nice in there? How many did you kill? And you're like, well, what happened was, today was like spring training. We're going to go get it tomorrow. You wake up the next day, ox milked up, and you're like, Joshua says, hey, we're going for another walk. Next day, we're going for another walk. Next day, we're going for another walk. They don't see any progress. Can you imagine the faith that it took to just show up and say, are we doing this again? Like, what's the whole purpose of this? What's going on? And do you ever wonder why he told them to be quiet? Do you ever wonder why he said that? I think it's because he remembers 40 years ago when it was what the spies said that kept them out of their promise. Sometimes the words that you say keep you from obtaining your promise. Sometimes the words that you speak over yourself, the doubt, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. Sometimes it's the words you say that keep you out of your promise. The last point I have is that the process is open-ended. A lot of times people won't persevere because they can't see the finish line. I told you I love working out. I write my own workouts in the morning, and then I go to CrossFit in the evening. And what I love about it is that when I write my own workouts, so I know when it ends. Right? I know how much effort I got to apply. I know what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to accomplish. Then I go to CrossFit, and the workout's always written on the board, so I know what I've got to do. What used to drive me crazy was I had a good friend in college, and this dude was like a beefed up musclehead. We used to call him Captain America because he was bigger than Chris Evans. I'm not even joking. Dude was huge. So I would go work out with him, But he would never tell me the workout. So I would put all I had into the workout, and he'd be like, all right, we're going to go do this and this. I'm like, what? I don't got nothing left, bro. He's like, that's all right, just keep pushing. I was like, it's not going to happen. Not going to happen. And what I've learned is a lot of times if we can't see the finish line, we'll count ourselves out. We'll count ourselves out. Did you notice that Joshua never told them how long it's going to take? Look at this. Verses 6 and 7 again says, Joshua, son of Nun, called the priests to them. He said, take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord and have 7 priests carry the trumpet in front of it. He ordered the army, advance, march around the city, and with the armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord. He never told the army, hey, we're doing this for 7 days. That's it. We're going to do this for 7 days. He didn't say that. He didn't. In fact, the only thing he told them to do was, hey, when I tell you to shout, shout. But other than that, keep your mouths shut. Just walk. Just walk. And you know, to me, it takes a whole lot of faith to go into a process. You know, a lot of our promises are open-ended. We don't know. We just know God says, do this and I'll give it to you. Do this and you can achieve it. I have this for you. But we don't know how long it's going to take. We don't know how long we got to stay faithful. And I think sometimes we just got to get up and go and just rely on it. Because see, here's the thing that I love about the soldiers is they didn't know, but they knew that Joshua had a word from God and they were going to follow Joshua. It's no different here. We know our pastor has a word from God, 1,000 people, to reach 1,000 people in this community. We know that he got the word for us to go hard after everything that God has for us. And we may not know how long the process is going to take, but we need to walk with him. We need to walk with him. He got the word. He got the word. Sometimes the promises you get come from other people. You just got to trust in the fact that they're listening to God and follow. It's just what it takes. The process is open-ended. We don't know how long it's going to take, but I'm going to follow that guy. I don't know how long it's going to take to get 1,000 people, but I'm going to walk. I'm going to walk. I'm not going to stop. And what's crazy is it's easy for us to look and say, you know, they just had to do it for 7 days. 7 days ain't a long time. They waited 40 years. Do you have the perseverance to just keep walking? Even if it's 40 years. Even if it's 40 years. Do you have the faith to keep moving? See, that's the whole purpose of today. Don't stop moving. 7th day, they got up. They got ready to go. They walked around the city 7 times. Here's what verse 20 says. When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. When they were obedient, they received their promise. That's what we start, radical obedience. We start it next week. Sometimes it takes looking different to obtain your promise. You think the traditional war strategy was to walk around a city for 7 days? I don't think so. If I was the Jericho people, I would have been laughing at them. Like, they think they're going to take our city? They're just taking walks. They've dug a big enough trench walking around. They might give us a moat. That's what I would have thought. Like, they've walked so many times. But sometimes that's all it takes is just persevering. When you persevere, for you need to persevere, for when you do the will of God, that's when you'll receive your promise. See, here's the thing. Sometimes you can't see your promise physically. Sometimes it's covered by walls, whether it's physical, spiritual, whatever it is, emotional. Sometimes your walls are covering your eyes and you can't see that you don't have the right perspective to see your promise, but don't stop moving. Sometimes you can't see your progress. It feels like you're going in circles. You may be walking forward and you don't know it. You may be going backwards or sideways. You may not know where you're going, but you know that you have a word or a leader leading you in that way. Don't stop moving. Sometimes you may not know where the finish line is. Here's the thing is, even if you don't know where the finish line is, it's still approaching. Don't stop moving. My word for you guys is some of you guys are on the verge of obtaining a promise and you don't even know it. You're on day 6, and all you got to do is keep walking. You got to keep walking, and then you're about to give a shout where the walls around your promise are about to fall down. Don't stop moving. Let us be the church that doesn't stop. Let us be the church that isn't afraid to cry out. We're persistent in crying out. We're persevering in our movement. We never stop because God has promises for us. He has promises for us. That's what I love about the Word. It's full of His promises. It's full of His experience. That's what I love about promises. If I promise you, listen, if you promise me ice cream, I'm getting ice cream. It's a promise. A promise is an experience, a guaranteed experience. It's not empty words. It's not empty words. We don't read the book that says, oh, that's delightful, that's cool. He walked around 7 times, the wall fell down. No, it was a promise that was given to him. And it was experienced because they were faithful. It was experienced because they were radical. It was experienced because they were obedient. Church, don't stop moving. Don't stop moving. I want to ask you guys, bow your heads with me. Dear Heavenly Father, God, we're thankful for your word. God, and we're thankful for the persistence of obedience in the Bible, God. God, I pray that we're a church that never stop and don't stop. Stay in our minds. Where they're always pursuing you, whether it's vocally, whether it's through our actions, whether it's through our thoughts, whether it's through our prayers. God, I pray that we never stop pursuing you. Because what I've seemed to notice, God, is when we don't stop, you move. When we don't stop, you're always moving. You're healing. You're breaking down walls. You're unleashing promises. You're unleashing experiences. So God, let us never stop going after you. Let us be radical. Let us look different to the world with faith in the fact that Jesus said, hey, I've got something for you. God, we love you. I'm thankful for this church and everything that they're doing, everything we're doing. God, and we just put you at the helm and we say we're going after it. Whatever you tell us, if we got to walk around Panhandle 7 times, we'll do it. If we got to shout from every corner of the town, we'll do it. We want your love, your presence, and your kingdom to flood this place. We love you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. I'm going to ask all the elders and Relate Life Group pastors to come up to the front. Listen, if you guys need prayer, we would love to pray with you. We'd love to give you a word of life. But let's go persevere. Let's never stop. Let's keep going to change the world. You guys down with that? Yeah? Let's go have a great week. Love you guys.